Okay, hello everyone. We're going to be talking about the first reading, and this should also give you an idea of the kinds of questions you can ask on the discussion posts. So I hope that you take from this something like the following. This should deepen your understanding of the reading that you've already done, and this should also further it in a couple key areas that we'll be going over, that the implications in the article are much more far-reaching than could be conveyed in the article, so that's why I'm talking about it. This is not just a redundant video. So this will also link up the abortion debate that's been going on with the article, and should give you a sense of where the debate was, where the debate's going, and maybe give you some opinion on the status of abortion normatively. So when I say normatively, I mean something like the good or bad features. So what makes abortion bad? What makes abortion good or okay? These are what we're going to be talking about. Very, very commonsensical words. So basically, we're going to define abortion. We're going to go over a couple problems with some of the definitions of abortion out there. We're going to explain some of the pro-life views, which you might not be so familiar with. And we're going to show how the Thompson article avoids a very difficult definitional or metaphysical question about abortion. And I'll emphasize why the article does that and how it does that. And we'll lastly talk about thought experiments and distortional features more generally as well, to kind of understand going forward what thought experiments are supposed to do in philosophy. So there's lots of ways you can define abortion. Here are all ways, either medical or legal, that are not particularly useful, at least for the question I just asked you, which is what makes abortion good or bad. So some definitions to kind of work with to start, some criterias, if you will, is that since a live birth ends a pregnancy, abortion shouldn't be defined as just pregnancy ending. So that's the first part. And the second part is that abortion must involve the death of the embryo or fetus. So this is going to help us understand more the normative questions and avoid begging the question in this case. So this is an example why you shouldn't presuppose the goodness or badness of abortion with the definition. So, for instance, if you want to say that the pregnancy must end in the termination of the pregnancy, you can't say that a woman with triplets who undergoes a reduction, an abortion of one fetus or embryo, you can't say that that is a abortion if the definition includes the termination of the pregnancy. So that's because they could have one fetus or embryo removed and have it not be delivered, right? And that would make the pregnancy not end. An option is that you could say that she has 3 pregnancies if she has triplets, which doesn't sound too intuitive, right? It doesn't sound like that is an answer we can give, because it just sounds like an awkward way to say pregnancy. We usually think of pregnancy as kind of a binary thing, and to not extend to twins in this way of if a person is carrying 2 kids. We don't usually say that she has 2 pregnancies ongoing. So this is why the abortion definition shouldn't include phrases like the termination of the pregnancy, because the pregnancy might be ongoing. So what I was just talking about before the slide was why we shouldn't include the normative criteria in the question of abortion. So some definitions have the use of reasonable. And what reasonable is doing here is to say that, well, you shouldn't abort what a reasonable person would think is a unreasonable time or reason to abort a fetus. So in this way, it's presupposing the kind of question, the normative question we were wanting to answer, which is what is a good or what is a bad abortion? So it shouldn't include these references to unnecessary or proportionality in abortion, because these are kind of normative judgments that we're trying to answer in the first place. So what makes an abortion unreasonable? What makes it proportional? And what makes a reasonable person okay with doing or not doing it is exactly what we're trying to answer. So it shouldn't be included in our definitions, because that's just presupposing the conclusion we want to get at, which is to find out when abortion is reasonable, unreasonable, necessary, unnecessary, proportional, unproportional. These are the questions we're interested in. So we should probably not include it there. A good starting place might be then to just give a very physical, descriptive definition to abortion. So one that's morally neutral, one that doesn't say that any particular case is morally right or wrong. And this would just be to use David Hirschnov's definition here. So it's just an event that is fatal to the embryonic or fetal entity in the reproductive tract. That's it. So this leaves open the question of what a good or bad abortion is. And abortions that are just omissions, like failure to take care of the pregnancy, will just be a miscarriage. And because this omission is without causal powers and didn't bring about the miscarriage. So, and that would be a way to bring in the judgment after we have the definition of what abortion is. So, getting to Thompson now. Thompson is going to grant pro-lifers premises. So for those of you that don't know, the two positions in the United States are usually referred to as pro-lifers or pro-choice. And pro-lifers are usually more conservative, and they believe that the rights fall on to favoring the fetus in the cases of abortion. So that you're usually anti-abortion and usually support laws that limit or ban abortion. And pro-choicers are usually the people who are on the side of agreeing that the women who are getting an abortion are on the right side of the question of rights, and that they are entitled to have access to abortive medicines, procedures, etc. So why the Thompson article is particularly interesting is that abortion often gets bogged down in metaphysical disputes about what a person is and when a fetus is a person. And these questions are really hard to answer. So maybe just reflect for a second about how you would define a person. It's not super easy, you'll find, and you might even not want to do this because if our definition has to answer something about persons and we have reasonable disagreement about what a person is, we might not want to have that be a policy if we have deep disagreements about this metaphysical question. So philosophers usually try to give necessary and sufficient criteria for cases of definition. So what is an abortion would try to say, what is the necessary and sufficient criteria? So necessary is to say that you have to have this element for it to be abortion. This would be something like there has to be a death in the fallopian and the reproductive tract of a human for it to be considered abortion. And that's also sufficient, meaning that if this criteria occurs, then you have the full definition. So if a death in the reproductive tract occurs, then this is a case of abortion. might be spontaneous, it might be an actual abortion or a miscarriage. These judgments we could consider after the fact of getting clear on what the definition is. So you see this in the pro-life debates because oftentimes the pro-choicers think that the fetus is not a person, and the pro-lifers are claiming that the fetus is a person, and it's not clear how to progress that debate, how one side could actually get a better hold and push the other side off of it and get some kind of conclusion both would accept. So Thompson is not going to answer this question, and that's a good because it's very difficult to answer, one, and two, we disagree about it. So Thompson is actually just going to stipulate that, pro-lifers are saying that the fetus is a person. I'm going to argue, I'm going to defend abortion and give them this kind of advantage. I'm going to say that, yes, the fetus is a person, and I'm going to start from that position. So it's granting the pro-choicers position and furthering the argument in a way that the pro-lifers should agree with if she gets to some kind of conclusion that is contrary to the position. So the violinist is most accurately applied to rape-induced pregnancy. So we'll start with this case. So pro-lifers assume that women have a right to control what happens in their body, but this right is outweighed by the fetal person's right to life. So this is the idea that the rights are conflicting in this case. So in the case of conflict of rights, you would want to kind of just pick the least harmful violation of that right. So the pro-lifers think it's pretty intuitive that you would agree that carrying a child for 9 months and giving it up for adoption after you have it is less burdensome than the death of the fetus, which they consider as a person. So they think this is pretty intuitive, and I think if they just prove that the fetus is in fact a person, that they've basically won the argument, because it seems obvious to them that an innocent person can't be killed. Their right to life exceeds any right that the mother can claim. So this is the view that the abortion debate is just a conflict of rights. So death is a greater harm than the woman's loss of bodily control. So we should just pick the least harmful of the two. And it seems intuitive to them that that death is a greater harm. This might be something that you can question in discussion posts. I've had some students not think this is so convincing in the past. And I'll be happy to hear what you have to say about that if you disagree with it. So Thompson is going to deny that abortion involves this kind of conflict of rights that the pro-lifers are talking about. She doesn't believe that it is a conflict in the sense of you just have to choose one right to not violate. So her thought experiment of the violinist is supposed to show you that even a person with a right to life doesn't have a right to use your body for 9 months. So the fact that you have a right to something doesn't mean that you have some infinite right for people to keep you alive or to satisfy whatever the right says. So Thompson is disagreeing here with the pro-lifers on this case. So to get a bit more clear on how this is happening, we're going to zoom into the thought experiment. So Thompson is going to have you imagine a case where you are kidnapped by the Society for Music Lovers, and you're attached to a violinist who has failing kidneys. So you're being used to filter the blood of the violinist, who is famous, and if you leave the bed for 9 months, you will kill the violinist. But if you stay in bed for 9 months and filter the violinist's blood, then your kidneys will be unharmed, and his kidneys will be fine afterwards because they're not faulty. They're just faulty. They're not non-functional. So he just needs it for 9 months, and then he'll be fine. So if you wake up in the bed and you think that I'm not going to stay in the bed for 9 months, that's crazy. You'll be kind of getting the intuition that Thompson wants you to have, which is to think that this is outrageous, that you're in no way morally required to stay in bed. And this is supposed to imply that there's some tension in the right to life, tension in the pro-lifers argument. So their argument, remember, is that the right to life trumps the right to control one's body. And she's giving a case where it seems plausible, or it seems outrageous that you would think that your life to the life of the fetus is going to trump your life, your right to freedom of mobility and freedom to do with your body as you see fit. So if you're allowed to disconnect a violinist and let him die, who is clearly a person, then why should you not be allowed to abort the fetus? This is the kind of dilemma that Thompson is giving to the pro-lifers. And if the pro-lifer is going to respond to this by saying that it is okay to unhook the violinist, then they are going to be charged with inconsistency, meaning that they're, in the one case of the violinist, they think that it is okay to let the violinist die by disconnecting themselves from him. But they're going to turn around and say that abortion is wrong. And why is that? Because it is killing of an innocent person. And what Thompson has just shown is that they don't think that the right of the violinist is going to take precedent over their right to not lie in bed for 9 months, right? So on the one hand, they're supporting the death of the violinist. They think that the violinist has no right to keep them in bed. On the other hand, they think that that women are forced to carry children for 9 months and they cannot kill an innocent kid. So it seems that they're kind of caught they're caught in a bind, which is making them seem inconsistent. So what are the pro-lifers saying? So they're saying something like, in the case of, if you would imagine, there's one more dose of medication and one person will die without it, and I might have, very slight nauseous symptoms. The person who is going to die should be given the medicine and not me, because their right to life is going to trump my right to health, right? So in this case, it seems intuitive that if these two rights are conflicting, then the doctors and the insurance company should give the person who will die without the medication the drug in question, while I will be left to be nauseous. And this is supposed to show that, in general, when there is a tension between rights, it should be the least harmful thing that is violated. The right to my health is not as important as the right to your life, so I will have to be sick, which is what the pro-lifers are saying with the case of abortion and why it is bad. So the pro-life argument, to kind of sketch out what Thompson is exactly saying and the charge of kind of inconsistency. So if we start with, so this is a sketched out argument, so there's going to be premises and then a conclusion, and hopefully the conclusion is going to be entailed, which is to say that there's no way to not get the conclusion if the premises are built in a way that supports it. So we'll talk about this more later, but to give you an idea, the kind of premises that we're working with is that, one, the fetus is a person. Thompson is totally fine with permitting this, although she does express some concern in the article that she doesn't need to grant this premise. So premise 2 is that a person has a right to life. This is pretty non-controversial, so a lot of the work is in this first premise. And then it seems that you can get from to the conclusion that a fetal person with a right to life cannot be killed, which is to say aborted. And Thompson is going to claim that the wrongness of abortion doesn't follow from being a person with a right to life without another premise. So there's not there's a missing premise here. It's what Thompson is saying, that there's some gap here. It's not that we can infer from premise 1 and 2 the conclusion. So what Thompson is saying is that it doesn't follow that these two premises give us the conclusion that the pro-lifers are seeking, which is to say that abortion is impermissible. Because if we add in premise 3 that Thompson thinks that the pro-lifers require, we see that it's going to say something like one's right to life entitles one to use another's body. And this is what the violinist case is doing, and this is what the abortion case is doing. And so it's supposed to be analogous in both cases. So Thompson believes that her violinist thought experiment is showing that premise 3 is false. And why premise 3 is false is because the right to life doesn't extend to all cases of no matter their burdens on other people. So it doesn't mean that a person can use another's body to stay alive. This is what Thompson is saying we have to include in this argument, and that is a false premise. So we can't infer that abortion is wrong. So Thompson's aware that the case of the violinist, as it's set up in the initial part of the article, is more like a rape-induced pregnancy, which is to say that there's no willing acts of so you were abducted by the violinist society and you were forced to do it. You can get up afterwards, but you're already hooked up to the violinist, right? Which is similar to rape-induced pregnancies, which is the unwillful sex leading to pregnancies. So the anti-abortionists will make an exception for rape-induced pregnancies. But this is another strand of Thompson thinking that the pro-lifers are inconsistent, because she doesn't think that one's right to life should depend upon how one came into existence. If you have a right, it shouldn't matter whether or not your father had consensual sex. It would be weird if it did, right? On their own arguments, we could understand from the pro-choice side a bit better how we would imagine this exception to be made for the case of rape-induced pregnancies. But Thompson sees that the pro-lifers are facing a much larger problem with admitting that abortions in the cases of rape-induced pregnancies are okay, but abortion more generally, in the case of consensual sex, is impermissible. And there's some, straining to make sense of this in the pro-life literature. I think it's something like, you can't ask a person who has been the victim of rape to carry the child. It would not be something that you would be permitted to do, even though it's the right thing to do. And that abortion in the case of rape-induced pregnancy is more like a crime of passion, which is definitely wrong, but not punishable, or not something that you could have some kind of policy about. So this is a way that they try to make sense of it. This would be another good point to press on the discussion posts. So getting to what thought experiments should be doing and what you should be thinking about when you're being told a thought experiment in philosophy is whether or not it fits the case that they're trying to reach well enough. So there are some good making features of Thompson's thought experiment that we're going to go through. So one is that half the population can't get pregnant. So the violinist is supposed to be a case that is not dependent upon gender. So that's a nice feature, because we don't think that that's particularly morally relevant in this case. It's not that features of being a woman are particularly salient here, at least as normally construed. So it's an effective strategy that Thompson is going to ask readers to imagine that they have been kidnapped, despite no matter what their gender is. So this is people might have a prior belief about what religion tells them is right and wrong, but in the case of the violinist, there's no kind of religious advice on violinists, so we can kind of get away from this really contentious and heated discussion about abortion and talk about something in a more neutral way that doesn't have us bringing in already our conclusions on the subject. So we'll talk about some features that make a thought experiment good or bad, and distortional features are ones that make them bad. And to get on the table really quickly, it doesn't matter if the thought experiment is unrealistic. It sort of depends there, but it doesn't matter that it's a far-fetched tale. It's supposed to be analogous in morally relevant ways. It's not the case that it being unrealistic is particularly important. So there's never been a case of the Society for Music Lovers abducting someone. That doesn't disprove the arguments that it's trying to reach, right? As long as it's relevant, it's analogous, that is to say, similar in morally relevant ways, it should illuminate us on the moral question that we want to answer, as long as it's similar enough in the right ways. So what is this thought experiment supposed to be doing? It's supposed to be it's intending to kind of simplify reality and to really just compare principles that we care about. So the right to control one's body. This is a duty to ensure life in this case. And a well-designed thought experiment should help us become aware of really deep moral commitments, not very superficial case-by-case reasoning. So once we do get clear on these principles, then we can kind of bring in additional factors that might have been simplified out that may or may not be relevant, and we can see if they are relevant, if they change our intuitions about the cases. But it's very helpful in these cases to get very clear and very simple first. So don't worry again about the details. Don't suggest like slight alternatives with just more realistic assumptions unless they are morally relevant assumptions that matter, and those would be distortional features if they are morally relevant and excluded, or included but are not getting at the right moral intuition that we want it to. So a good thought experiment should avoid distortional features, and it should include the morally relevant features of the ethical issue in question. So it needs to be analogous on the one hand, that's two. So it needs to be all the morally relevant kind of principles are being engaged with in both cases. So in both cases, the violinist is being denied life, as in the case of abortion, allegedly, right? So these are both questions of the right to life versus the right to the fetus, or the right of the mother and the fetus. And again, remember that Thompson doesn't believe that it is, in fact, a conflict of rights. She believes that the fetus's right to life doesn't extend beyond, it doesn't include using another person's body. So keep that in mind. But and then it lacks distortional features. And what are distortional features? So there's something like features that aren't morally relevant, but they change your intuition about the case in question. So to give you a good one, it would be something like someone's opposed to late abortion, but not early, because the fetus looks more baby-like and more cute, let's say, than in early abortions where they look less like humans. So if it's the case that in both scenarios we're agreeing that both fetuses are persons and one is just more cute than the other one, and that is swaying your thought about whether it's right or wrong in this case, then that is a distortional feature because it is an aesthetic judgment about what is cute, and that is swaying your judgment about the moral permissibility of abortion or whether or not it is permissible. So this is not generally a feature that we want to include because we're trying to get at the cases of right to life, right? We're not trying to get at the cases of whether or not something is cute enough to not abort. And this is a distortional feature, and we shouldn't include cuteness and the thought experiment. You might think that another one is unnaturalness. So the use of kidneys to save another is not something that kidneys normally do. So this is the kind of like naturalness objection that kidneys are not normally functioning for other people. So it's not a duty that you have to help other people with. Another one is that it just seems like an unlikely scenario, and that it is the case that it's hard to imagine that this is something that people frequently need to have. So in the case of abortion, this is a more, let's say, common occurrence is people needing abortions. And in fact, half the population can be in this position where they might be thinking about abortion. But it's the case in a violinist that it's so particular that it doesn't seem like it's the case that you can really imagine that it is a more general case of people needing to be put on, dialysis with another person like the violinist is. So we might be able to fix this if we imagine that everybody will need, at some point in their life, they will need, a 9-month stint where they will have to be hooked up to another person with functioning kidneys. If we imagine that, we might get closer to the kind of thought experiment that is modeling abortion a bit better. But maybe you think this is not fair, right? You might think this is not getting at what we want to get at. So it's kind of an open question, but it seems to be the case if it's more common, if it's just the case that all humans need to have 9 months where they're hooked up to another person while their kidneys are not working. It seems harder to deny that they have some kind of right to do this. So this is a good feature. This is a good area to press on if you are pro-choice on the Thompson argument. Another one is that when we imagine you getting kidnapped, the violinist seems to kind of inherit the evil of the Society for Music Lovers because he seems kind of complicit in the capturing of you and the unwillful abduction of you. So we shouldn't. This is a distortional feature that is included rather than excluded from the Thompson argument. So in this case, it seems like we want to say something like, it doesn't matter whether or not the child itself was born by rape or not. If it's the right to life that is supporting this, the defense of why it's wrong for abortion, we shouldn't think that it is the case that whether or not they're born from rape or consensual sex is going to have any impact on our decision to have an abortion or not.